what are we chatting about today, Sam?
So we're going to be going over some of our favorite meals. But also I think more interesting than just kind of throwing up photos of foods that we eat and things like that. Why are we actually kind of picking those meals? How are we thinking about kind of curating them as well, both from a practical standpoint and just nutrition as well? So first things first, what would you look for in terms of the characteristics of just an overall healthy meal?
Yeah. Um, so I think it would be a good idea to have like a little bit of like an overview of like what makes up a healthy diet
Yep.
first. So there's honestly, it's just it's not necessarily like a minimally processed diet. Like that's actually not the case. I don't like this idea that like all foods that are processed are inherently detrimental. That's just not true, essentially. But generally speaking, it's a diet that's filled with fruit, veg, beans, grains, and legumes. That is
Yep.
generally what you want your diet to be based around. Um, Maybe you want a direct source of like EPA and DHA in there as well. So that's fish, fatty fish for individuals who eat fish, or just even taking like an algae supplement instead. But no, it's really and truly it's food. Like your carbohydrate sources want to be like whole grains. Anything that's a whole grain is a good plan there. Um, your proteins want to be either like a plant predominant protein or a lean protein, and your dietary fat you want it to be like plant based fats essentially. So like whether it's like nuts or oils, essentially just avoiding like massive amounts of like butter or ghee or fatty red meats essentially.
Yeah. One of the big things that a lot of those foods are actually tracking as well as just part of, I guess, kind of the food package that you kind of get with each individual item, right? A lot of the things you mentioned have a really strong amount of fiber in them, and
Yeah.
fiber is just a generally good proxy for
Yeah.
how healthy is this meal, how healthy is your diet in general.
Yeah.
Um, you can have, of course, like fairly health promoting meals as part of a diet that also then incorporates fiber elsewhere. But I think for the most part, it's a very, very good idea to get a good portion of fiber with every meal. So sort of looking at two portions of fruit is a good general rule, I'd say, with breakfast. And then a good portion of veggies for lunch and for dinner. I think that's a handy kind of way of going about things when you're on the go as well. And things are a little bit less specific and maybe more vague. If you can get two fruits in with breakfast, and then guarantee sort of at least two vegetables with lunch and dinner, you'll find that you're actually in a really, really nice spot there as well.
Yeah. I had a nice little like TLDR on a healthy diet. I'm gonna have a quick little scan to see if I can just paste that into the chat. It will be helpful, but essentially it's like get like fruits up towards like 400 grams every single day, veggies up towards 600 to 800 grams every single day, getting fiber intake up towards like 30 to 35 grams every single day.
Yep.
Uh, One of the things you will notice is naturally as a function of eating less calories, um, in a deficit, your fiber intake will be that little touch lower. But once you're finished with fat loss, then that's one of the best things that you can do is just like bump up your sources of foods that are high in fiber, essentially.
Yeah.
I'll have a
Um,
quick little scan for that. But
I'm
yeah,
also just going to drop a quick link in the chat. I think another useful thing outside of just fiber is also just the general calorie density of different foods. Generally speaking, not always the case, but generally speaking, kind of the lower the calorie density of a food, a lot of the time, the more health promoting it is. Again, that's not necessarily always the case. You're going to get things like oils, you're going to get things like avocados, fatty fish, like you mentioned, that are a little bit more calorie dense, which are very, very much health promoting. But it can be a nice kind of general rule, and again, kind of guide choices and things like that, especially on the go.
yeah.
There's a
So,
nice, sorry, I was just going to say, there's a nice little chart on this link here, that actually kind of covers some of those things.
cool. Yeah. So like that is the predominant issue with ultra processed foods is not necessarily the like the processing methods or the denaturing of the food or anything like that. It's a couple of things. One, it's like the dehydration. So the dehydration of a food, you're removing the water from a food, therefore it's got more kind of calorie density. It's the beautiful combination of like, okay, we're going to have a high amount of dietary fat and a high amount of added sugars. And then we couple that with like a sweet and salty tasting. And that's just ripe for overconsumption. It's things that we can consume quickly without much appetite regulation. that are just prime for like overconsumption. Also, like on the food matrix side of things as well, our ultra processed foods are generally like lower in fiber as well. So it's just like the fact that like this food is highly unsatiating, has low amounts of fiber in it, generally speaking, low amounts of protein in them as well, depending on what we're talking about. Um, that's really where the detriment of ultra processed foods come from. And again, just adding into your overall like total sodium intake as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of go a little bit more specific from healthy diet to what makes a good fat loss meal, but then also how does that kind of contradict what makes a good meal when maybe we're looking at getting calories a little touch higher as well. Say we're going through a muscle build phase and we're looking at fueling those sessions as much as possible, getting more carbohydrates in, things like that. And I think satiety is essentially the biggest difference there, right? Satiety kind of per calorie that you're consuming. If you can consume more satiating foods, of course, to keep ourselves fuller when food is lower. And then maybe if food is a bit higher, lean into actually some of those less satiating, potentially in some cases, more hyperpalatable foods. Because again, like you say, it's not always the case that processed foods that could be a bit more calorie dense are not health promoting foods. Lean towards some of those can actually be quite helpful there as well. So looking at something like the satiety index, from a standpoint of fat loss, leaning towards the things towards the top of that, like boiled potatoes, maybe oats, things like that as our primary sources of carbohydrates. And then let's say we're maybe going the other way. A good example I would typically use if we're looking at getting food a bit higher would maybe be starting to add a bit more, maybe honey to breakfast, maybe a few more sauces, things like that can be helpful. Looking actually at less satiating food. So again, you mentioned dehydration. It could be a case that you actually still go ahead and get a bunch of fruits in, but you use the dried variation instead.
Yeah, like if you're trying to gain weight, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So I think a good thing for us to chat about is just like overall like meal timing and meal structure before we dive into kind of individual meals. Give me some of your thoughts around meal timing.
Yeah, so I guess just to kind of carry on from what we discussed there around breakfast, things like that, right? I guess there's this kind of thought that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And from that, I think there's kind of two schools of thought, and both could be helpful for individual people, right? One is there is some good evidence that actually, if we front load a good portion of calories in the morning, that can help with appetite later into the day. And then there's also potentially a school of thought that works for some people that actually, if you aren't waking up overly hungry and you just leave breakfast and you then just save your calories for later in the day where you can have a bit more food volume, that could also work a little bit nicer for you. So I think the big kind of takeaway from that is meal timing in general. The specifics of it largely don't matter as long as we're kind of hitting our targets, right? Let's say we're looking for fat loss. As long as we're consuming fewer calories than we burn on a day to day, the timing of your meals isn't going to make a huge difference to that, right?
Yeah. It's a nice indicator there, just that everything works.
Yeah.
Some degree of like awareness and like structure and plan, whether it's an intermittent fasting or whether you are front loading calories, doesn't necessarily matter as long as you have a degree of a plan and structure there. Is going to be helpful there. Socially, I generally will find like leaving additional calories for later in the day can be helpful. So like that's what I'll generally do myself. Like I'll never have like a traditional like breakfast meal essentially. Unless I've got a really big, really early training session in. But other than that, generally speaking, I'll have my first meal around like 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only time I would maybe try and get a bit more specific with it is maybe final meal timing around bed, and just looking at pushing that a little touch earlier. Not that it's a case of you're going to store more body fat or anything like that if you eat closer to bed. It's more just you're more likely to get a decent night's sleep if you've not got food sat on your stomach. So you can maybe look at least sort of 2.5 hours ahead of going to sleep would be the only time that I'd really get a little bit more specific with that as well.
Yeah. I think a really good, safe general rule is to try like eat within a 12-hour eating window.
Yeah.
Like if you're having your first meal at 7:30 in the morning, then you probably shouldn't be like having your last meal at 11 o'clock in the evening, essentially. Trying to have some degree of boundaries and structure in terms of meal timing there can be helpful.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. We actually just had a message come into the chat as well. Can we comment on some of us who eat on the go, ideas that could work, mostly breakfast? I believe you can get some oats overnight pouches that work really, really nicely. I think you just have to add water to those and they're then all set up. So you could essentially just pick one of those, put that in your work bag, whatever that looks like, fill it up at the office and make that up. If it is a case that you have to kind of prep that overnight, of course, you could still kind of take that with you and have it whenever, right? Again, dried fruits, I think in that scenario can sometimes be helpful if you need kind of non-perishable items, right?
We're
Again,
going
they
to the
are going to
moon.
be a little
We're going to the moon.
um if they're I don't know, maybe it's too hot to carry kind of other fruits and things, but you can always get away with like apples, bananas, oranges, things along those lines. I would carry some sort of fruit, maybe some sort of a shake that you've made. You just sip on it through the morning, get some oats in that shake so it's a bit more satiating. Things along those lines are generally what I would turn to.
Yeah, yeah. Like maybe there is a degree of like prepping that you can do the night before to have something easy on the go with you. Maybe this is a situation there where I would be doing like some degree of like intermittent fasting if I really am pushed for time in the morning. Then I'll just like prep my lunch and bring my lunch to the office with me, and that will be my first meal of the day. Maybe it's something as simple as okay, I'm just gonna have a 50-gram protein shake in the car on the way to work, something like that to hold me through if I don't get lunch until 1:30, let's say. Um, or then even like just little tubs of like Greek yogurt or tubs of cottage cheese will
Yeah.
be helpful there as well. Yeah.
Things that you could just kind of pick up from any sort of grocery store or anything like that. Right.
Yeah.
Just had another little question. In fact, a few questions. We'll start with the first one here. Um, being a proponent of intermittent fasting, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Like it's nothing magical. It doesn't carry any additional benefits of like beyond just like structure and like appetite, no, not even appetite regulation, just giving you a degree of structure. I think it's a super helpful intervention for body weight maintenance or even weight loss as well. Yeah, so
Yep.
like it's personally what I'll do myself. I don't think like I wouldn't be like I don't think it has anything beneficial in terms of like autophagy and stuff like this that you'll hear. But it's just more so good structure, good routine that gives you a good degree of consistency. So there's no issue with it whatsoever. So
Yeah.
sorry, it's actually really helpful. Like,
Yeah. I think it could also be a helpful tool to action kind of on the go and things like that, right? Um, in terms of it adds a layer kind of restriction around calories there,
yeah,
where it's otherwise difficult to be specific around those things. Um, yeah, like you say, it's not necessarily doing anything kind of crazy special, but it can be a helpful tool for sure. How about getting in probiotics? Can we use kimchi, sauerkraut, things along those lines, or is there any supplements for probiotics? Definitely use those things towards veggies, things along those lines. That's essentially the benefit that you'll get from that. Just kind of added vegetables within your diet.
yeah, yeah. Like that I wouldn't be using like a probiotic supplement. I don't think we have the evidence to support using one, to be completely honest, and finding one that's actually effective as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like not something personally I've actually like back in the day when like I couldn't really could decide for between poor and good quality information. I definitely did use probiotic, but it was additional, just an expense that wasn't actually giving me any return on investment. Essentially,
Yeah.
I'd just be focusing on overall diet quality as a whole. I could I'd be more fiber centric than like probiotic centric. Like if
Yeah.
you it like the big thing when it comes to like overall like gut health, for example, is diversity in your veggie intake. So essentially just like getting in as much veg as you possibly can, opting for like a colorful variation of veg as well. That's really where I would be focusing. So like maybe with your when you're doing your weekly food shop, you'll experiment with some veg that you know you tolerate, like you know it's fine, but it's just not your go-to. So I think having a little bit of flexibility in terms of your veggie options there can be really, really helpful. Like that's what we'll do ourselves. So like there's a couple of options in terms of like mixed bags of like frozen veg, and we'll just rotate between them to give a little bit of diversity, but also just like food burnout as well. I did glance at that being the question down there as well, but we'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was actually the next one. How do we handle same meal fatigue? Finding that we're getting bored of the same thing over and over again. I think the big thing there is trying to do kind of the same but different in a sense. So something that I'll do, for example, rather than prepping a full meal, I'll prep part of a meal, and then I'll have quick, easy carb options that I can turn to. So let's say, for example, I will prep my protein source alongside my veggies, right? Typically what I do there is literally just take some chicken, some peppers, some onions, throw them all in together, and that's kind of my mix for the week. From there, for the evening, oftentimes I'll just kind of make up a variety of a bowl, right? And I'll either put rice with it or couscous with it, maybe some straight to wok noodles, things along those lines. And then you can even season the chicken after the fact. You could cook it just plain, season it up after the fact as you reheat it in the microwave. And then you can create a whole host of different meals. So alongside the couscous, I might do some sort of a Spanish seasoning. Alongside some straight to wok noodles, I might do some sort of Chinese 5-spice, right? Maybe I decide, oh, you know what? I've actually got a little bit more time tonight. I'm going to air fry some potatoes for 15, 20 minutes, right? Chuck them in, do a whole host of different things with them. So I think looking at the same but different, and looking at maybe what's the most valuable part of a meal to actually prep. What parts of a meal could I prep just quickly each night? So microwave rice, couscous, you're just adding boiling water, little things like that. Maybe you need to save some calories. You could do some microwave cauliflower rice as well as a quick, easy swap there. Little things like that that allow you to change it up on the go based on kind of how you're feeling that day, I think can be helpful in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think you want to find that balance between having a degree of rigidity, but also being able to be flexible with it as well. I think working on building up your boredom tolerance for breakfast, lunch, and snack, just working on, but like this meal is fine. Like it does the job essentially. Like you will get to a point where you're like you'd get burnt out of a meal and you have to change that. But generally speaking, you can eat the same repetitive thing. Right now, like personally, I can do it for like 6 months and then I'll move on to the next thing, essentially, trying to build up your boredom tolerance for breakfast, lunch, and snack. And then for dinner, let's say if you know that you're having the exact same breakfast, lunch, and snack every single day, it's easy to be tracking a chronometer. Maybe you leave yourself 600 calories there for dinner. And then you've got a little bit of room to do essentially whatever you want dinner wise, as long as the kind of same foundational principles apply of like, okay, I'm getting in 250 grams of veggies. I'm making sure I'm like tracking the oils and the sauces that I'm using. And then you can have a nice degree of flexibility when it comes to what you actually do for dinner.
Yeah.
Another thing, sorry, Sam, I would say is like use some free time to experiment with things, see if they actually work in terms of like the speed and the enjoyment of the meals. So let's say, like over the weekend, that's where you'll experiment with creating some meals, building it out in chronometer, seeing if you actually enjoy it, seeing if it's quick enough to make. And then if you experiment and you're like, yeah, do you know what, that works, then you can incorporate that in during the weekday, essentially.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I'll do. So like my overnight oats in the morning, I've kept exactly the same ever since I think we came back from Dallas. I've been eating that. And if I get a little bit bored, the only thing I change, to be honest, is the protein powder flavor that goes into it. It changes it up enough that I'm fairly happy with that. Lunch, the only thing I really change, just seasoning on the chicken that I have there. And then for dinner, sometimes I'll mix it up a little bit more. Normally, for me, I have enough time to cook in the evening, so that's something that I'll often do. But if I am a bit more short on time, we'll do that prep that I discussed as well.
Yeah, I think something like that. Like if you're doing protein oats, just change the flavor of the protein powder. If you're having fruit on it, swap from a blueberry to a cherry. Little things like that. It's a whole different meal. And then because that's so quick, you can do it on the go. You can do whatever you fancy on the spot every single morning, essentially. Now, like if you do have the control over that individual meal in terms of it doesn't have to be brought with you and pre-prepped in advance, making them little swaps that are same but different are really helpful there as well.
Yeah. Just a topic that I think is actually worth going into as well. That we kind of touched on a little bit when we were discussing the difference between fat loss meals versus maybe trying to gain weight meals, right? Discussing kind of free sugars and things like that there, right? When I say, okay, adding a little bit of honey, things along those lines, right? Oftentimes people say, hang on, my sugar's going up, right? What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be necessarily super concerned about added sugar up to a certain point, depending on like on what the source of it is. So like added sugar isn't inherently detrimental once calories are controlled. If you've super amount like if you've really large amounts of added sugars, like if things like sugar sweetened beverages in there and stuff like that, like they're like a no-go essentially. But having a little bit of a higher amount of sugar, as long as calories are controlled, is not an issue whatsoever. Like sugar isn't inherently toxic. The big detriment to sugar is the fact that it's usually packaged into foods that we overconsume, and it also displaces other foods. That's the way you think about sugar in the diet. So every time you have a high amount of sugar, if you want to control energy balance, then you have to reduce your healthy foods like your fiber and your fruit and veg to keep calories in a good spot. So sugar itself is not inherently detrimental. And personally, like what I'll do myself is when I'm doing my dinners, I use more sugar-based sauces than I will oil-based sauces. Like if I do 20 grams of sweet chili sauce, that's trivial calories in comparison to me doing a taco sauce. So I can actually like it has a disproportionately beneficial effect on taste in comparison to using like a fat-based alternative, essentially.
Yeah.
So if I want to do a decent serving of garlic mayo, like I'm gonna have to use it like easy, like 200 calories. But I can get a little bit out of a sweet chili sauce or like a hoisin sauce or something like that. So yeah, it would be bumping up my sugar intake, but overall calories matter more.
Yeah. Yeah. The big difference there is obviously that just sugars being carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram, as opposed to say an oil-based sauce or something like that. It's going to be 9 calories per gram for fats, right? And as long as I would also say, as long as the free sugars, like you mentioned, aren't kind of replacing fibers and things like that in the diet. Like you mentioned, it's kind of a case of when you consume one thing, you're not consuming something else. As long as you're still getting the other constituents of a healthy diet in, then yeah, free sugars.
Yeah. So like, let's say, for example, you have a meal and you've got oats. You swap your oatmeal for like what's that mad cereal? Give me a mad cereal.
Frosties.
Yeah, there we go. Frosties. So you swap your oats for your Frosties. That's going to have a detriment effect on your health from a function of like decreasing your overall fiber intake. But the sugar itself is not inherently detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also just again, I guess to go back to the topic of meal timings and things like that, from a standpoint of muscle gain.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot around kind of carbohydrates before your workout, things like that. And then also protein after our workouts. So protein after the workout, not really going to make a difference at all. Again, as long as you're hitting your total protein through the day, that's the biggest thing. From there, you could argue kind of, and we'll dive into this in just a second a little bit more as well, but how we actually kind of split up our calories and our macros throughout the day. There is probably value in splitting up protein intake across the day, at least a little bit, right? And then outside of that, in terms of carbohydrates before a workout, you could maybe suggest that there's some benefit from just kind of the taste of carbs in your mouth, gives some like perception of effort benefit. But your glycogen stores are probably full enough as it is that it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. Like this is like pretty well teased out in literature for resistance training. Carbohydrates don't seem to matter too much. Pre-workout carbs don't seem to matter too much. Now, in saying that, like the psychological side of things, I think is relevant. Like if you know you're going in for a really, really big session, going to be nice to like not be doing that fully fasted. But if you're after having carbohydrates in your meal pre-bed and you're training fasted in the morning, it's not a major issue. You don't necessarily need to have a meal. It's not going to necessarily affect your performance. And that's something I've changed my mind on as well. That would have been like peri-workout nutrition, like getting a carbohydrate source in before workout. That used to be like a non-negotiable of mine in terms of coaching and the way I used to think. It doesn't actually seem to be true.
Yeah. I'm not actually sure on the strength of this, to be honest. Um, but I've seen a couple of bits around as long as you're essentially going into a workout and you're not actively hungry, you're pretty much okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't know about like being
But
actively hungry. To be
yeah.
fair, um,
Um, otherwise, yeah, in terms of kind of just splitting calories throughout the day, what would be your thoughts in and around that?
yeah. So this is where like I don't like the idea of like having a small like gym snack and things like that because it just takes away from your overall structure. Like if you want to have a 150 or 200 calorie snack pre-workout, then you have to remove that from somewhere else. That's fine. Like you can do it if you want. But what will generally happen is they'll just end up bumping up net calories if you're trying to be in a deficit. So remind me exactly what the question was, just around structure
In-
as a whole.
yeah, essentially, if you've got, say, 1,600 calories to play with,
Yeah,
right, how are you going about splitting that throughout the day?
yeah, yeah. So I'm going to do 3 meals. I'm gonna do 3 meals. I find 3 meals is the most helpful, and I just like will just tolerate a little degree of hunger in between their meals.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna do like, say if I have 1,600 calories, I'm probably gonna leave 800 calories for dinner. I'm gonna leave 800 calories for dinner because I like to have a nice dinner. Simple. So then I've got 400 calories for 2 meals. I'll probably do something like 550 calories for my first meal, 250 calories for my middle meal. The 250 calories for my middle meal will more than likely be like a Greek yogurt with some fruit. And then for breakfast, I'll do something that I'm getting in a hefty amount of protein in. And because I'm only having 3 meals, if I'm trying to get in 160 grams of protein, I need to be getting in like decent, like 50 gram servings of protein in them meals, essentially. Yeah.
yeah,
Like 2 meals and two like snacks, like real small, like protein servings can be helpful as well. I think when we try and spread our meals over 4 meals, obviously you can do it. I just prefer to have bigger meals essentially. So if you can build up like the tolerance of going a little bit longer periods of time without meals, then it can be really helpful. The last thing that you want though is to go too long without a meal. You're absolutely ravenous. You've nothing prepped. And then as you're prepping dinner, you've already hoovered up 500 calories just waiting for dinner to be made because that can
yeah,
happen as well. Um, but if you can get used to going, like having a really good structure of like 2 big meals and 2 protein heavy snacks, I find that helpful. Or what would you do essentially?
yeah. So, I'm actually eating around about 600, 1,600 calories at the moment.
Stuff for
Um,
you.
so I do about 350 calories for my breakfast. I do about 400 for my lunch. And then I also typically do a slightly bigger meal, but I then like to have two snacks as well. Just as something that I can go, you know what, I am actually a little bit peckish. I've got room to go ahead and work for something, and that works for me. Outside of that, to be honest, for the most part, I'm reaching out for like diet beverages and things like that. Um, but no, for me, I like to have kind of two smaller snacks in there. One of those, to be honest, is just a bit of a treat. Like I'll do a squares bar or something like that. And then outside of that, normally I'm having like some sort of yogurt with some fruit as kind of like a post evening meal. But yeah, for the most part, I keep breakfast, lunch fairly low. I'm looking at about 750 calories for those two combined. Um, with my snacks, I'm probably looking at a total of around about 300 calories altogether. So yeah,
Mm,
dinner's normally around sort of 550 to 60 to 600, and that works quite nicely for me.
cool.
Yeah,
Nice. So we go through a couple of like go to meals.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So essentially, like I'm completely veggie, so all of my recommendations are veggie. Um, breakfast was doing like an egg and an egg white, buying a carton of egg whites. If you do like one egg with 150 ml of egg whites and like 200 grams of like a spinach or an onion or a mushroom, you can like just turn it into a big massive omelet. That's a like safe shout. I like to do a shakshuka as well.
yep,
So what I'll do is I'll make this big kind of like I'll do my egg with my egg whites, and then instead of the veggies, I'll just do a tomato sauce. We just make our own tomato sauce, and I'll stick the tomato sauce in and do a shakshuka. Um, if I've got like a higher calorie day or I've got a heavier training session, then I'll more than likely do a protein oats. So essentially, what I do is with my whey, I'll turn that into a paste. So instead of making a protein shake into a shake, what I do is I take my whey, I add like 40 ml of water, I mix it up and it turns into a paste. So I'll have my oats and then I'll stick my whey paste on top of that and I'll do some fruit on top of that. Generally, my go-to fruit is either a blueberry or raspberry with that. I go through phases. Like I'll generally get in the serving of soy protein at some stage throughout the day. I haven't done a tofu scramble in a while, but I did go through a phase of like just smashing tofu scramble for breakfast.
Yeah.
And then my current thing at the moment that I'm doing myself and Lucia just going hell for leather on cottage cheese. To be fair, yeah, I definitely do like 500 grams of cottage cheese every single day. It's elite.
Yeah. You said last week actually on the cottage cheese as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so like one of my snacks at the moment is I'm doing cottage cheese and I just do a squirt of sriracha into it. It's elite. It's
I've
good.
still never tried it.
Yeah, I can't describe it. Like it's not tasty. It's like Greek yogurt. Like Greek yogurt by itself is not tasty,
Yeah.
but it's tolerable. Like I still look forward to the meal, even though it's not delicious. Essentially,
Yeah. I think you took most of the the breakfast options, to be honest. I'm almost always leaning into oats myself. Um, Sometimes what I'll do at the weekend, because we typically kind of prep overnight oats for the 5 days during the week, so I can just get back from my morning walk, grab breakfast, good to go. Sometimes at the weekend we'll do like a breakfast hash. Probably pretty similar to what you mentioned with the tofu scramble. We'll literally get a little bit of potato. We'll fry off an egg, put that on top, a bunch of veggies in there. Pretty much use it as we're coming towards the end of a grocery shop and we've just got random veg left over in the fridge. We'll basically just dice it all up, throw it in a pan, fry it off with some seasoning, some potatoes, put a fried egg on top. Works quite nicely. Otherwise, yeah, yogurt bowls always going to be a staple. Just a whole bunch of fruit on top. Maybe a square of dark chocolate, something like that. Generally works quite nicely. For lunches, to be honest, I like to keep it quite just plain and simple. I will prep literally just my protein for lunch, and then the rest of it I'll throw together. So I'll either do some sort of bread there that I'll toast, maybe put a bit of cream cheese on it and make a sandwich. Chop up some salad, veg, things like that in the middle of the day, or I'll do pretty much the same but with a wrap. If I know that my dinner is going to be a bit more carb heavy, I'll just scrap either the bread or the wrap and just make it into a bigger salad. Quickly whisk up like a yogurt based dressing. So what I'll do there is just get a little bit of Greek yogurt, some lemon juice, some mint, some garlic, mix it all up. Literally takes 2 minutes, and then just drizzle that on top. And that works a nice way to be flexible and quickly save some carbs if I need to for the evening there as well.
yeah, cool. Yeah, my lunches I love a bit of cereal. So sometimes my lunches are just like there's two things I'll do. I'll either do my like protein oats and berries for lunch, or I'll do it like an all bran and whey. So essentially, like I'll create like a milk out of the whey essentially. So that will be my milk, and then I do an all bran, which is incredible and essentially just a stupid high fiber cereal. So I'll do all bran and whey. I like that as a meal as well. Just like again, it's quick and easy. It takes me a whole 14 seconds to prep.
Yeah.
And then I generally have like my lunch and dinner meals are fairly interchangeable. I just will do whichever one I particularly fancy, and then if I just modify the serving sizes. So, for example, if I'm doing one of my meals at the moment is a tofu and mango bowl, so I'll do tofu, mango, rice, veg, and then essentially if I'm doing it for lunch, I'll do a slightly smaller serving size. If I'm doing it for dinner, it'll be a little bit bigger because, as I said, I want to leave a little bit more calories for dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tofu, I'll go run through my list and then
go for it.
Go. So that tofu and mango bowl with some rice, I found that great with some hot sauce, some sriracha on that. Then I do a protein soup. So I buy like a low calorie pre-made soup, and I use Quorn, which is essentially it's a meat alternative. Absolutely phenomenal. Like you can find it in a lot of supermarkets in the States. Quorn is Absolutely fantastic. Really do recommend it. So I do a big serving of corn. I generally do like 250 grams of corn, which is actually a humongous serving, and then I just pour soup on top of it. So that's one of my meals at the moment. I love doing like silly big servings of salsa. So I'll do like literally like 300 grams of salsa, and I'll do that alongside a fake meat of some sort. So generally speaking, it'll either be a corn or like a soy mince of some sort, essentially. Um, and then the other thing I will do is I'll make a big thing of coleslaw. So they do a big coleslaw, but I use instead of using mayo, I just use a Greek yogurt. So I'll do like carrots, onions, cabbage, chop that all up, and then I'll stick some degree of a protein serving in on top of that. If it like an air fried tofu, generally goes quite well with that. And then the other one, I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to during previous fat loss. I used to do like either an apple or a pineapple salad. So I get a degree of sweetness using apple or pineapple, and do that with a bunch of like salad leaves essentially, and then I get a protein serving in through like an air fried tofu there with that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I actually went through quite a lot of the options that I typically do earlier. Literally just kind of mixing and matching with that. But yeah, if we've got time, we like to get quite creative. We'll throw together like all kinds of different pastas, things like that. The main thing is essentially there's always a lean protein in there. Generally, we're doing chicken or turkey mince for us. Again, could be swapped for pretty much anything that you just mentioned by way of tofu or kind of like a corn mince alternative or anything like that. So we'll throw together like a chili con carne. The big thing is whenever we have the opportunity to prep something in bulk, typically we take that opportunity. So let's say we're cooking most evenings. If we are doing something like a chili or a bolognese or something like that, and it's easy enough to cook it in bulk, we'll go ahead and do so. And then we'll just throw a few options in the freezer for kind of like a rainy day or later in the week. If we get to the evening, we're like, you know what, I could do with a night off cooking. We'll just pull it out the freezer and we're good to go. Otherwise, yeah, just pretty much always ensuring that I'm getting at least sort of, to be honest, 300-400 grams of veg with my evening meal for the most part. Just to just get like a nice heavy plate of food. And then, yeah, outside of that, just generally pick a carb source and make something work. So like if we're doing a pasta, for example, our go-to there is chicken with some broccoli, small amount of creme fraiche, mix that in, bit of garlic, works perfectly. Throwing some spinach in there whenever we're doing a pasta as well, it wilts down pretty well. Things like that.
Yeah, cool. And then just a quick question in the chat just about like the plant-based meats. So there's pros and cons to them. It depends on I can't make a general statement on whether they're beneficial or detrimental. I wouldn't necessarily be worried about or I definitely wouldn't be worried about any like additional like chemicals per se. There is certain things that, let's say, for example, like the Impossible meat, like that's not necessarily like one, they're delicious to be fair, like they're phenomenal, but there's a couple of things that will like lean me away from an individual using an Impossible meat on a regular basis. First thing is the calorie density relative to protein. Like they are a decent serving of protein, but also just a tiny bit too high in calories to be using on a daily basis, essentially. The major issue with them is the amount of sodium in them. Like that is the only real issue, because generally speaking, it's a source of soy. So if it's health promoting, you're going to get in more fiber than you would using like the animal alternative. The only real issue with them is the sodium and then sometimes the energy density in them. But like there's also plenty of options there that are great in terms of like calorie density. That can be used like every single day. Like I use it's an own brand UK like soy mince, and it's great. It's absolutely super. It's touch too high in salt, so I just modify the frequency in which I use it across the week. I'm not using it every single day because it is a tiny bit too high in salt. But like other than that, it's really protein dense. It's not super calorie dense. That they can work perfectly. A nice way of doing it is actually just like tracking it in Chronometer and looking at your sodium. Like if your sodium is up too high with using it in, then maybe making like that swap to a less sodium dense version of the equivalent thing. That's essentially it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be worried about like the degree of like processing or anything like that in them. Yeah. So that G is a nice little review. Let me send on.
We've also just had another question whilst you try and find that. Just wondering, how do you adjust these meals so the whole family can eat the meal rather than having things that you make for just yourself? And silly but practical question, how in the world do you not spend hours chopping when meal prepping for the whole family at the weekend? Um, I think in terms of prepping for the full family, um, generally what I would do is kind of work out the calories going into the whole meal, generally. Um, I would then, to be honest, for me and Kerr, since it's just two of us, we just kind of eyeball half, and know that things are kind of going to average out over the course of the week for us, right? Um, so from there, once you've kind of worked out what's going into the full meal, you can almost say, okay, I want a quarter of this. Go ahead and do your serving first, but be very strict with that. To be honest, I would say, especially if your goal is fat loss, err a little bit more on the side of caution there. Um, Outside of that, if you did want to be more specific, you could. And you could go ahead and take the cooked weight of that meal and then essentially just divide it by, let's say you want a quarter of it, divide it by four, work out what the weight's going to be if you did want to be more specific there. In terms of the chopping side of things, I'm quite lucky that I'm just quite fast at chopping, to be honest. I've gradually got a little bit better. I used to be useless. But otherwise, just to make life easier, you could buy some things that are pre-chopped. Like just make life easier. If there's a degree of kind of prep within the process of cooking that's taking you hours and meaning that something is more challenging to follow through on, just make your life easier. Buy pre-chopped proteins, buy pre-chopped veggies. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I despise chopping. I think I've got through the last 5 years without like minimal chopping because I just buy like everything is just pre-cut. Like all of the frozen veg is all pre-cut, mixed like bags of stir fries and things like that. Even like like fresh mixed veg already that can be like it's ready to walk essentially.
Yeah.
That's really what I'll do there. Probably should learn how to chop to be fair. Actually, no, I don't think so. I've got so far without it. It's fine. Yeah, just buying things that are already pre-chopped is just a lifesaver. Like as Sam said, anything that reduces that barrier to you getting it done is helpful.
Yeah, exactly that. Sweet. Just had a shout out for Abbott's meat alternatives as well.
I've seen these before. Let me have a quick little look at the um what essentially the macronutrients on them.
I think this is my client Raj who did a shoot in Dallas.
Good.
I'm certain I see Abbott's quite a lot.
Yeah, they look great. Um, don't know why they don't have. Oh, they do have sodium there. Yeah, no issue with that whatsoever. That's something again. You probably want it. And I wouldn't be using it every single day, but definitely something that can be a part of an overall healthy diet.
Cool. So, any other questions that anyone has, by all means, shoot them over. But yeah, back to the
Yeah, honestly, that's exactly how I feel about cottage cheese. It used to gross me out, and now it's phenomenal. Yeah. Um, I think Sam, what would be nice. I forgot to actually mention like one of my other things there is like I get a decent degree of like sweetness in my diet. My diet is not just all like bland essentially. So there's a couple of things that I will do to make my meals more enjoyable. One, I use a really nice tasty protein powder. So my protein powder is generally sweet. It's generally tasty. Like I really like it. It actually like will curb a craving.
what have
So
you got?
um, I have like seven down there. Um, I use a Optimum Nutrition white chocolate raspberry elite. And then I've cookies and cream, Optimum Nutrition as well.
Hmm.
The Ghost protein powders are great as well.
Yeah.
They're really tasty. Making them into a sludge and doing them on some oats or doing that on your Greek yogurt is a great show. The next thing I'll do is I'll use like a flavor drop. So you can buy
Yeah.
flavor drops like a toffee or a caramel flavor drop for your yogurt. Great shout there as well. I'll go through probably like at the moment I'm sitting quite lean and it's kind of difficult to stay quite lean from an appetite regulation perspective. So I'll probably go through like 500 ml of like diet drinks every single day.
Yeah.
So usually like Diet 7 Up is my go-to. Yeah, and then I'll have appetite regulation wise as well. I'll generally have 2 coffees as well, 2, 3. I've got decent tolerance for caffeine essentially. Um, so and then one of my other go-tos as well is I'll do I really like using meringues. So meringues, they're so light. Like they're so light that you can crunch like a couple of meringues. You can crunch like 2 meringues onto some yogurt, get that degree of like sweetness from a meringue. Like 2 meringues is like 50 calories or something like that. Something you can easily work into a meal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get like a significant degree of like sweetness in my meals just from protein powders, my meringues, like the sauces that I use as well. So as I said, I'm kind of sweet centric in terms of my sauces. So I use like a sweet chili sauce very frequently. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it. I'm not too dissimilar, to be fair. Protein powder in the morning works quite nicely. Square of dark chocolate in there. Lunch generally, if I am using any sort of sauce, it's going to be a sweet chili as well. Yeah, fairly similar.
Awesome. Other than that, I don't think we've anything else to chat about.
Sweet.
As always, it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you for joining.
Appreciate everyone coming along.
And we will chat to you next week.